World of Warcraft, Rise of the Horde, by Christy Golden. Chapter 2. I remember when I first encountered the Tauren. I remember Cairn Bloodhoof's deep voice and calm face. I remember sitting on the ground in a tent that could be broken down and erected with a startling speed, and feeling oddly at home. We smoked pipes, shared food and drink, felt the drumming in our bones, and talked. The Tauren seemed to me bestial at first, but there was wisdom and humor in them, and by the time the first rounds of negotiation had been conducted, I knew that the Orcs had a rare ally in these half-bovine beings. Night had fallen while we spoke, a soft night befitting this beautiful land. We left the tent and gazed up at the stars, too numerous to count. A sweet wind caressed our faces. I turned to Draenor to ask for his wisdom. To my astonishment, I saw tears on his face, glinting in the moonlight. "This is how we used to be, my chieftain," he said in a broken voice. He lifted his arms and tilted his head back, calling the wind to embrace him and dry the tears on his strong green face. Close to the earth, close to the spirits, strong in the hunt, gentle with the younglings, knowing our place in this world to be right and just, understanding the balance of taking and giving. The only magic the Tauren practice is good, clean magic of the earth and the land that reflects it, the way Draenor once reflected our connection. I thought of the Tauren's request for aid in fighting their enemy, the vile, filthy centaur. Yes, I feel for them. It will be good to be able to help them, I said. Draenor laughed, turning his blind eyes to me and seeing me more clearly than anyone with sight could. "Oh, my young thrall," he said, chuckling still. "You do not yet understand. They will help us." Durotan ran as fast as his powerful young legs could carry him. His breath came fast, and sweat dabbled his reddish-brown skin, but he forced himself to keep going. It was summer, and his large, flat feet were bare. Grass was soft beneath him as he ran, and occasionally he would step on a bright purple blossom of a dandelion flower. The scent from the bruised plant, traditionally cultivated for healing, wafted up like a blessing, inspiring him to run even further, even faster. Now he was on the fringe of Tricador Forest, pushing forward into its cool, gray-green depths. He had to watch out for the twining roots of the elegant trees, lest he trip over them, and his performance slowed. Soft lights glowed in the green heart of this forest, and the calm it exuded was at sharp odds with Durotan's need for triumph. He increased his pace, leaping over fallen tree trunks covered with moss, ducking under low-slung branches with the grace of a taubuck. His black hair, long and thick, spilling all the way to the middle of his back, flew behind him. His lungs burned, and his legs cried out for him to cease. But he grounded his teeth and ignored the pleas from his body. He was a Frostwolf, the heir to clan chieftaincy, and no Blackrock would possibly. Durotan heard a fair approximation of a war cry behind him, and his heart sank. Orgrim's voice, like Durotan, was still sinking towards the deep below that marked an adult male, but even Durotan had to admit it was already impressive. He willed his legs to pump even harder, but they felt as heavy and unmoving as if they had been carved out of stone. He watched in dismay out of the corner of his eye as Orgrim came into his field of vision and then with a final spurt of energy raced past him. The Black Rock extended his arms and lunged, managing to hit the tree trunk that in the clearing that they had decided represented the goal of the race right before Durotan did. Orgrim kept going for several more strides as if his powerful legs, once put into motion, were reluctant to stop. Durotan's legs had no such problems, and the heir to the Frostwood clan fell forward, barely catching his breath. He lay face down on the cool, sweet-smelling mossy earth, gasping for air, knowing he should sit up, knowing he should challenge Orgrim again, but too exhausted to do anything other than lie on the forest floor and recover. Beside him, he heard Orgrim doing likewise, and then the other orc, young youth, rolled over on his back and began to laugh. Durotan joined in. The birds and small animals that inhabited the Trickador forest were silent as two orcs uttered sounds of mirth that Durotan thought, as his lips curled past his still-forming tusk, probably sounded more than a little like a fierce warrior cries that presented a hunt. "Ha!" grunted Orgrim, sitting up and punching Durotan in a playful manner. "It is little effort to beat a stripling like you, Durotan. You have so much muscle, your brain is starved," Durotan retorted. "Skill is as important as power, but the Blackrock clan wouldn't know about such things." There was no malice in their banter. Their clans had been troubled at first by the friendship between the two youths, but Durotan's stubborn argument that just because something had never been done before did not mean it could not be done. Amused and impressed, the leaders of both clans. It helped that both the Frostwoods and the Blackrocks were both traditionally ever-tempered orc clans, or even-tempered orc clans. Had Durotan proposed such a friendship with a Warsong clan member, or Bone Chewer, for example, known for their intense clan pride and distrust of others, the little flame of friendship would have died quickly. So the elders watched and waited for the novelty to fade and for each youth to return to his rightful place and keep the familiar order that has been established for as long as anyone could recall. They were disappointed. The frost of late winter had given way to spring, and now the full blowsy warmth of summer, and the friendship continued. Durotan knew that they were watched, but as long as no one interfered, he did not object. Durotan closed his eyes and let his fingers spread over the moss. The shaman said that all things had a life, a power, a spirit. They were deeply involved with the spirits of the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and the spirit of the wilds. They claimed they could sense the life force in earth and even seemingly dead stone. All Durotan could feel was the cold, slightly moist sensation of the moss and soil beneath his palms. The earth shuddered. His eyes snapped open. He bolted upright, his hand automatically going for the spiked club that he constantly carried. Orgrim preferred a heavy metal and wooden hammer, the traditional weapon of the Black Rocks, and a simplified version of the legendary hammer that would one day come to him. The two boys exchanged glances. They did not need to speak to communicate. Was the thing that made the earth shake so an enormous clefthoof with a shaggy pelt that made magnificent blankets and rich red flesh that could feed almost a whole clan? Or was it something more dangerous? What did live in the Trickador forest? Anyway, I had been here only once before. They got to their feet in unison, their small dark eyes peering into the now ominous seen dark corners of the closed growing trees, searching for whatever had made the noise. Boom! The earth shuddered again. Durotan's heart started to beat faster. If it was a small cleft hoof, maybe they could take it down together and share the spoils with both clans. He glanced over at Orgrim and saw the other's eyes gleaming with excitement. Boom. Crash. Both youths gasped, and they retreated as the noise came closer. A tree only a few yards away from them seemed to splinter before their eyes. The thing that had made the noise and so casually dispatched an ancient tree suddenly came into view. It was enormous. It carried a club as big as they were, and was most definitely not a cleft hoof. And it had seen them. It opened its mouth and bellowed something that was vaguely intelligible, but Durotan wasn't about to waste time figuring out what it had said. The thoughts were as one. The two boys turned and fled. Now, Durotan wished desperately that they had not decided to challenge one another to a race earlier, for his legs had not fully recovered. Yet still they moved when he asked it of them, the need for survival lending him energy. How did they wander so far into ogre territory? And where were the Graan? Durotan imagined one of the ogre's masters forcing its way through the trees as the ogre had, towering over ordinary ogres, and ogres towered over the orcs, even more hideous than an ogre. Yeah. More of the earth than of flesh, and yet so terribly wrong. It was its one eye bloodshot, staring as it pointed at Durotan and Orgrim, and directed the ogre towards it. He and Orgrim were not yet of season where they would be. He and Orgrim were not yet of season where they'd be initiated into adulthood and permitted to go with the warriors of the clan to hunt the ogres and on rare occasion the Graan themselves. They had gone on hunts that their clans had perceived as less dangerous for Talbot and other easy prey. But Durotan had always yearned for the day when he would be allowed to tackle these fearsome creatures, winning honor for himself and his clan. Now, he wasn't so sure. The earth continued to tremble, and the shouts of the ogre were coming more clear now. "Cross little orcs, me smash!" The roar that followed this almost made his ears bleed. The thing was gaining on them, despite his brain's panicked orders to his body to run faster, faster, curse you! He could not put any distance between him and the monstrous being that loomed so close that its vast shadow almost blotted out what little light filtered through the tree's branches. The trees thinned and the light grew brighter. They were close to the edge of the forest now. Durotan kept running and burst into the open space of the meadow, his feet falling upon soft grass. Orgrim was ahead of him, but not by much. Despair washed through Durotan, followed hard by a black wave of fury. They were not yet adults. They had not gone on their first real hunt. They had not danced by the fire with the females. They had not bathed their faces in the streaming blood of their first solo kills. There was so much they had not done. To die a glorious death in battle was one thing, but they were so overpowered by this hideous creature as to make their deaths humorous rather than honorable. Knowing it could cost him precious seconds, but unable to resist the impulse, Durotan turned his head to scream a curse at the ogre before it smashed him as flat as a grain cake with his club. What he saw made his jaw drop. The rescuers did not utter a sound. They moved in silence, a quiet tide of blue, white, and silver that seemingly sprang out of the very air. Durotan heard the familiar whine of arrows shrieking through the air, and a heartbeat later the ogre's cries were tinged not with rage, but with pain. Dozens of arrows, tiny things on a massive pale body, sprouted from it, and it halted its deadly progress. It yelled and tried to brush the irritations from its skin. A clear voice rang out. Even though he did not understand the language, Durotan recognized words of power when he heard them, and his skin prickled. Suddenly the sky was filled with lightning. This was unlike any lightning Durotan had seen invoked by a shaman. The blue and white and silver innards crackled around the ogre, swirling about him and closing in on it like a net. The monster bellowed again and fell. The earth shook. Now, the Draenei, their bodies covered in some sort of metallic plating that reflected the cool hues of the magical energy in a display that dazzled Durotan's eyes, dismounted and descended upon the fallen ogre. Blades flashed, more words of power and command were uttered, and Durotan was forced to shut his eyes or be driven mad by the display. At last, silence fell. Durotan opened his eyes again to see that the ogre was dead. Its eyes still stared. Its eyes still stared. Its tongue protruded from its parted lips, and its body was covered with red blood and black burn marks. So great was the silence that Durotan could hear his own raging, ragged breath and that of Orgrim. The two looked at each other, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Both had seen the Draenei before, of course, but only at a distance. They came now and then to each clan, ready to trade their carefully crafted tools and weapons and decorative pieces of carved stone in exchange for the thick pelts of the forest animals, brightly woven blankets, and raw materials the orcs culled from the land and stone. It had always been an occasion of interest in the clans, but the exchange only lasted a few hours. The Draenei, blue-skinned, soft-spoken, eerily arresting, did not invoke closeness, and no clan leader ever asked them to stay and share their hospitality. Relationships were cordial but aloof, and everyone involved seemed to want it that way. Now, the leader of the group that had arrived so unexpectedly strode over to Durotan. From his position on the earth, Durotan saw what he had never noticed when he regarded the Draenei from a distance. Their legs did not go straight from their torsos to the earth. They curved backwards like a taubuck's, and ended in cloven hooves that were encased in metal from the shiny blue hoof upwards. And yes, it was most definitely a thick, hairless tail that swished back and forth. Now, their owner was bending over him, offering a strong blue hand. Durotan blinked, staring a moment longer at the unexpected shape of the Draenei's feet and the reptilian tail, and then got to his feet, unaided. He looked into a face that bore strange plating on its head, like armor that had grown there. Black hair and a beard flowed over a colorful halberd, and the piercing, glowing eyes were the color of a winter lake. "You are injured?" the Draenei asked in a halting, common Orcish, his tongue obviously having trouble wrapping itself around the guttural syllables. "Only my pride," Durotan heard Orgrim mutter in his clan dialect. He, too, was somewhat stung. The Draenei had obviously saved both their lives, and he was grateful, of course, but they had seen two proud orc youths running from danger. Granted, that danger might have been very real. One blow from the gigantic club would have squashed him and Orgrim into two small, crumpled piles, but still. The Draenei may or may not have heard or understood Orgrim. Durotan thought he saw the lips curve in a smile. The Draenei glanced skyward, and to his dismay, Durotan realized that the sun was low on the horizon. "You two have wandered far from your home, and the sun settles to sleep," he said. "Which clan do you hail from?" "I am Durotar, of the Frostwolf clan, and this is Orgrim of the Blackrock clan." The Draenei looked startled. "Two different clans? Were you challenging one another, that you wandered so far from your respective homes?" Durotan and Orgrim exchanged glances. "Yes and no," Durotan said. "We are friends." The Draenei's eyes widened. "Friends? From two different clans?" Orgrim nodded. "Yes." He added somewhat defensively, "It's not traditional, but it's not forbidden. The Draenei nodded, but he still looked surprised. He regarded both of them for a moment and then turned to two of his companions and murmured something in his native tongue. Durotan thought the language profoundly musical, like the sound of a stream meandering over stone or a bird's call. The other two Draenei listened intently, then nodded. One took a water skin from his belt, drank deeply, and began to run with a knot nearly as smooth and swift as a Talbot's heading southwest where the Frostwolf clans were. Second raced towards the east were the Blackrock clan. The Draenei who had been speaking with them turned. They will notify your family that you are well and safe. You return home tomorrow. In the meantime, I am happy to offer you the hospitality of the Draenei. My name is Restalan. I am the leader of the God of Telmor, the town in which both your clans regularly trade. I regret to say I do not remember either of you, but then the Orc younglings seem to a bit leery of us when we come into your territory. Orgrim bristled. I'm afraid of no one and no thing. Restalan smiled a bit. You ran from the Ogre? Orgrim's brown face darkened, and his eyes glinted angrily. Durotan lowered his head slightly, as he had feared. Restalan and the others had borne witness to their shame, and now they would be mocked. That, Restalan continued calmly, as if he had not noticed the effect his words had on the two, is wisdom. If you had not fled, we would be sending 2 corpses home to your family tomorrow instead of 2 healthy, strong orc youths. There is no shame in fear, Orgrim and Durotan, only in letting fear prevent you from doing the right thing. And in your case, running was definitely the right thing. Durotan stuck his chin out. One day, we'll be strong in our full size, and then it will be the ogres who fear us. Restalan turned a mild face to him, and to Durotan's surprise he nodded. I completely agree, he said. Orcs are powerful hunters. Orgrim narrowed his eyes, looking for a taunt, but there was none. Come, Restalan said. There are dangers in the Trigador forest at night that not even the god at Telmor will be willing to face. Let us go. Though exhausted, Durotan found the strength to keep up a steady running pace. He would not twice be shamed in one day. They ran for some time, and the sun eventually dipped below the horizon in a glorious display of crimson gold and finally purple. He glanced up now and then, trying not to appear rude, but curious indeed at seeing these strangers at more than several yards' distance. He kept waiting for the signs of a city, roads made by countless feet traveling the same path, fire cranes lighting the path, the shadows of buildings against the darkened sky. He saw nothing. And as they continued, he felt a quick stab of fear. What if the Draenei were not planning to help him and Orgrim after all? What if they were going to capture them, to hold them for ransom? What if they were going to do something worse, sacrifice them to some dark god, or... Here we are, Restalan said. He dismounted and knelt on the ground, moving aside some leaves and pine needles. Orgrim and Durotan exchanged confused glances. They were still in the middle of the forest. No city, no roads, nothing at all. Both orcs gathered themselves. They were severely outnumbered, but they would not die without a fight. Still kneeling on the pine needle carpet, Restalan uncovered a beautiful green crystal, being carefully hidden beneath the everyday detritus of the forest. Durotan stared, enraptured at the beauty of the thing. It would fit in the palm of his hands, and he ached to touch it, to feel that smoothness, that strange pulsing against his skin. Somehow he knew it would exude a calm and the likes of which he had never experienced. Rassilon uttered a string of syllables that branded themselves in Durotan's brain. Kellam and Saw. Sole Lamaka. The forest began to shimmer as if it were a reflection caught by a one still lake into which a stone had been tossed. Despite himself, Durotan gasped. The shimmering increased, and then suddenly there was no forest, no trees, only a large paved road that led up the side of the mountain to a place that contained images Durotan had never conceived. We are in the heart of Ogre country, though it was not so when this city was built so long ago, Rassilon said, rising. If the ogres cannot see us, they cannot attack us. Durotan found his tongue. But how? A simple illusion, nothing more. A trick of the light. There was something in the way he said this that made Durotan's skin prickle. Seeing the orc's confused expression, Rassilon continued. The eye cannot always be trusted. We think what we see is always real, that the light always reveals what is there the same way at all times, but the light and shadow can be manipulated, directed by those that understand it. In the speaking of these words and the touching of the crystal, I have altered how the light falls upon the rock and trees, the landscape, and so your eyes perceive something entirely different from what you thought was there. Durotan knew he still stared stupidly. Rassilon chuckled slightly. Come on, my new friends. Come where none of your people have ever been before. Walk down the roads of my home. Chapter 3. Drekthar had not seen the cities of the Draenei when they were at peace. He only saw them when, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. But he told me that my father had walked the shining roads of the Draenei, had eaten their food, slept in their buildings, spoken with them fairly. He caught a glimpse of a world so unlike our own that even today it is hard to wrap one's mind around it. Even the lands of the Kaldorei are not so alien to me as to what I have learned of the Draenei. Drekthar said that Durotan did not have the words to describe what he saw. Perhaps today, living in a land that bears his name and seeing what I have seen, he would. Regret is a bitter taste. Durotan couldn't move. It was as if the mysterious net of shining energy had flung itself about him as it had the ogre, and he was as helpless to resist. He stared, his mouth slightly open, trying to make sense of what his eyes showed him. The Draenei city was glorious, woven into the side of the mountain as if it had sprung from it. To Durotan's eyes, it was a union of stone and metal, of nature and artifice. He did not know exactly what he was seeing, but he knew it to be harmonious. With the concealing spell dissolved, the city was revealed in its tranquil magnificence. Everything he saw drew his eye upward. Massive stone steps, wide and blunt at the base and tapering towards the top, led to spherical dwellings. One reminded Durotan of a snail's shell, another of a mushroom. The combination was striking. Bathed in the hues of the setting sun, the bold lines of the steps were softened, and the dome seemed even more invitingly round. He turned to see a similar expression of awe on Orgrim's face, and then saw the slight smile curving Rassilon's blue lips. You are welcome here, Durotan and Orgrim, Rassilon said. The words seemed to break the spell, and Durotan moved forward awkwardly. The stone of the roads had been smoothed by the time, or the Draenei's hands. He could not say. As he drew closer, Durotan could see that the city continued up the mountain. The architectural patterns of a wide, bold steps leading to a softly curved structure was repeated here. There were long roads made of the same white stone that somehow did not seem to get dirty, although at least 10 generations of orcs had lived and died since the Draenei had arrived. Instead of the skins and horns of animals slain in the hunt, the Draenei utilized the gifts of the earth. Gleaming gems were everywhere, and there was a curious overabundance of light brown metal unlike any Durotan had ever seen. The orcs knew metal. They worked it to serve them. Durotan himself had helped in the hunt with an axe and sword, but this... "What is your city made of?" Orgrim asked. It was the first thing he had said since the two began their odd journey in the company of the Draenei. "Many things," Restaurant said, eminently. They were passing through the gates now and receiving curious but not hostile looks from denizens of this place. "We are travelers, fairly new to your world." "New?" Durotan said. "It was over 200 summers ago that your people came here. We were not as we are now." "No, you are not," Reston agreed smoothly. "We have watched the orcs grow into strength and skill and talent. You have impressed us." Durotan knew it was meant as a compliment, but somehow the comment stung, as if the Draenei thought they were somehow better than the orcs. Thought came and went, fleeting as a brush from a butterfly's wing. He kept looking around, and to his shame, wondered if that was not indeed the case. No orc dwelling was this ornate, this complicated, but then the orcs were not the Draenei. They did not need or choose to live like the Draenei. To answer your question, Orgrim, when we arrived here, we utilized everything we had brought with us. I know your people build boats to travel the rivers and lakes. Well, we came in a boat that travels the sky. A boat that brought us here. It was made of metal. Other things. Once we realized that this was to be our new home, we took parts of the boat and used it in our architecture. So that was the giant, muted, swirling metal that seemed at once to be made of copper and skin. Durotan's breath caught. Beside him, Orgrim scowled. "You lie! Metal cannot float!" An orc would have growled and boxed Orgrim's ear hard for such insolence. The Draenei merely chuckled. "So one would think. But one would think that it would not be possible to summon the elements to fight an ogre if one did not know better." "That is different," sniffed Orgrim. "That is magic." "So is this, of sorts," Restaurant said. He beckoned to one of his men and said something in his native tongue. The other Draenei nodded and hurried ahead. "There is someone I would like you to meet, if he is not too busy," Restaurant said, and then fell silent. Durotan had 1,000 questions, but did not dare voice them, fearing that he would make himself look foolish. Orgrim seemed to have accepted Restaurant's comment about magic, but both youths still craned their necks looking around. They passed many Draenei in the streets, and once saw a female who looked about their age. She was delicately built, but tall. When Durotan met her gaze, she seemed startled, and a soft smile curved her lips, and she ducked her head shyly. Durotan felt himself smiling in return. Without thinking, he said, "In our encampment you would find many children. Where are the Draenei children?" "We do not have many," Restaurant said. "Our people are very long-lived, and because of that we do not often have children." "How long-lived?" asked Orgrim. "Very," was all Restaurant would say. "Suffice it to say that I remember our arrival here." Orgrim stared openly at their companion. Durotan wanted to elbow him, but he was too far away. He suddenly realized that the youth-seeming female they had just seen was probably nowhere near his age after all. At that moment, the scout that Raslan had dispatched returned and spoke quickly. Restaurant looked pleased at whatever the scout had to say, then turned, smiling to the two orcs. The one who brought us to this world, our prophet Velen, is staying here for several days. I thought he might wish to see you. It is not often we get such visitors. Restaurant smiled wide. I'm very pleased to say that not only has Velen agreed to meet you, he has invited you to stay with him this evening. You are to dine with him and sleep in the Magister's house. This is a very high honor indeed. Both boys were struck dumb. Dinner with a prophet? The leader of the Draenei? Durotan was beginning to think it might have been better if he had been squashed flat by the ogre's club. They followed dutifully as Westland led them down the winding, climbing streets through the foothills and to the large building that sat highest on the mountain. The steps, perfectly square and solid, seemed to go on forever, and Durotan's breath came quickly as they climbed. He reached the top and was regarding the snail-shell structure with interest when Westland said, "Look back." Durotan and Orgrim obeyed, and Durotan's breath caught in his throat. Below them, spread out like jewels on a meadow, was the Draenei city. The last bit of the sunset painted them in flaming colors. The sun settled over the horizon, and all was bathed in shades of purple and gray. Lights came on in the houses, and Durotan thought of the stars in the sky settling on the earth. I do not mean to brag, but I am proud of my people and our city, Rextalon said. We have worked hard here. We love Draenor, and I never thought to have the chance to share it with an orc. The ways of destiny are strange indeed. As he said this, a deep, almost ancient sorrow seemed to settle on his strong blue features. He shook off the mood and smiled. Come in, and you will be attended to. Silent, shocked, almost beyond the ability to speak, the young minds wide open to all the sights and sounds and smells of this thoroughly alien place. Durotan and Orgrim entered the magistrate's seat. They were shown into rooms that, while ornate and beautiful, made them feel oddly penned in. The curving walls, so attractive from the outside and no less lovely here, seemed to confine rather than embrace them. Fruits sat in bowls ready for consumption, strange clothes were set out for them to wear, and a tub of water, so hot that it seemed, sat in the middle of the room. This water is too hot to drink, and it's too much for seeping leaves, Durotan said. It is for bathing, the Draenei replied. Bathing? To wash the dirt from one's body, Restaurant said. Orgrim shot him a look, but Restaurant seemed to be quite serious. We do not bathe, Orgrim growled. We swim in the rivers in the summer, Durotan said. Perhaps this is similar. You do not need to do anything you feel uncomfortable with, said Restaurant. The bath, the food, the clothes are here for your pleasure. Prophet Velen will expect you in an hour. I will come for you then. Is there anything you need? They shook their heads. Restaurant nodded and closed the door. Durotan turned to Orgrim. Do you think we're in danger? Orgrim eyed the strange materials and the hot water. No, he said. But I feel like I'm in a cave. I would rather be in a tent. Me too. Durotan went to the wall and tactfully touched it, the carving surface. It felt cool and smooth beneath his fingers. He realized that he expected it to feel warm and somehow alive. Durotan turned and pointed at the water. You want to try it? Or no? Both orcs started to laugh, and both eventually splashed their faces and found the warm water to be more pleasant than anticipated. They ate the food, drank the water, and decided that the cloth vests laid out for their use, were acceptable to wear in place of their soiled, sweat-stiff tunics. That would keep their leather breeches. The time passed more swiftly than they anticipated, and they were engaged in a challenge to bend one of the metal legs of the chair when there came a soft knock on the door. They jumped guiltily. Orgrim had managed to twist the chair leg somewhat, and it stood a bit crooked now. "The Prophet will see you now," said Restallon. "He is an elder," was the first thing Durotan thought as his eyes met those of the Prophet Velen. Seeing the other Draenei up close had been startling enough to behold Velen was something else again. The Draenei Prophet was half a head taller than the tallest of the city guards Durotan had seen, but not as powerfully seeming physically. His body, clad in soft, swirling, light tan robes, seemed less muscular than theirs, and his skin was a warm alabaster hue. His eyes, deep set and wise, glowed a brilliant blue, and were encircled by deeply etched wrinkles, speaking of one who is not just an elder, but possibly even an ancient. His silver hair had not flowed down his back, as was the case with the others, but was ornately braided and looped, exposing his pale skull. His beard flowed like a silver wave almost to his waist. "Not an elder, an ancient," Durotan thought as those intense blue glowing eyes settled upon him and seemed to bore into his very soul. "Almost outside of time altogether." He thought about Restallon's comment that he himself was over 200 summers. Velen was a good deal older than that. "Welcome," Velen said in a mellow voice as he rose and inclined his head. The braids danced with the movement. "I am Velen. I am glad that my people found you today, though I doubt that not in a few years you would be more capable of handling an ogre and even a Gron or two by yourselves." Again, Durotan did not know how he knew this, but it was no idle compliment. Orgrim sensed it too, for he stood up even straighter and met the Draenei's eyes evenly. Velen waved them to sit, and so they did. Durotan felt awkward and ungainly, sitting in the lavish table and the ornate carved chairs when the food came out, he relaxed inwardly. Hunk of talbuk, roasted white feathers, large rounds of bread, and plates heaped high with vegetables. This was food he knew and understood. Somehow he had expected something entirely different. But why? Their buildings and way of life might be vastly different from that of the orcs, but like the orcs, the Draenei lived off what the land could provide. The preparation was slightly unusual. The orcs tended to either boil their food or cook it over an open flame, when they cooked at all. Frequently, flesh was eaten raw, but overall, food was food, and this food was delicious. Velen was an excellent host. He asked questions and seemed genuinely interested in the responses. How old the boys would be before they could hunt ogres, choose a mate, what was their favorite thing to eat, their favorite weapon. Orgrim, even more than Durotan, warmed to the conversation and began talking of his prowess. To his credit, he did not need to embellish his stories. "When my father passes, I will inherit the Doomhammer," Orgrim said proudly. "It's an old and honorable weapon, passed down from father to eldest child." "And you will swing it well, Orgrim," said Velen. "But I trust that it will be many years before you take on the name of Doomhammer." The fact that his father would have to die before he would become Orgrim Doomhammer seemed to have momentarily escaped the young orc, and he abruptly grew solemn. Velen smiled, with Durotan, thought, a hint of sorrow. At the movement, fine cracks appeared in Velen's face, the subtlest of spider webs on a smooth white surface. But describe this hammer to me. It must be a mighty weapon. Orgrim brightened again. It is enormous. The stone is black and blunt and powerful, and the shaft is made of carefully crafted wood. Over the years, the shaft had to be replaced, but the stone itself is not chipped on it. It is called the Doomhammer because when its owner takes it into battle, it spells doom for the enemy. I see, said Velen, still smiling. Orgrim was warming to his task. But there is also another prophecy, he continued. It is said that the last of the Doomhammer line will use it to bring first salvation, then doom to the Orc people. Then it will pass into the hands of one who is not of the Black Rock clan. All will change again, and will once again be used in the cause of justice. That is a powerful prophecy, said Velen. He said no more, but Durotan felt a shiver. This man was dubbed Prophet by his people. Did he know if the Doomhammer prophecy would come true? Did Durotan dare to ask? Orgrim continued describing the Doomhammer in loving detail. Durotan, who had seen the weapon in question, ceased listening to Orgrim's chatter and focused on Velen. Why was this being so interested in them? Durotan was a sensitive youth, he knew. He had overheard some snippets of conversation from his parents, who were worried about such sensitivity, and from his mother Kesher, who scoffed at them and told them to worry about important things and to leave the boy to his fate. Durotan knew feigned interest in what he saw, and when he saw it, and felt that he'd recognize it even in the Draenei. But Velen's brilliant blue eyes were bright and focused, his kind, if ugly, face open, his questions sincere. He wanted to hear about the orcs, and the more he heard, the sadder he seemed to become. I do wish Mother Kesher could be here instead of me, Durotan thought suddenly. She would appreciate this opportunity more than Orgrim or I could. When Orgrim had finished describing the Doomhammer, Durotan asked, Can you tell us of your people, Prophet? We know so little. In the last few hours, I've learned more than any of my people have over the last 100 years, I think. Velen turned glowing blue eyes to Durotan. Durotan wanted to quail from that gaze, not because he was afraid of it, but because he had never felt so seen. The Draenei have never withheld information, young Durotan. But I believe you may be the first who has ever asked. What do you wish to know? Everything, Durotan wanted to stay, but instead focused his question. The orcs have never met the Draenei until 200 summers passed. Restlin said you came here in a great vessel that can travel the skies. Tell me more of this. Velen took a sip of his beverage. It tasted like summer to Durotan, and smiled. To begin with, Draenei is not our true name. It is a term that means exiled ones. Durotan gasped. We disagreed with others in our world. We chose not to sell our people into slavery, and for that we were exiled. We have spent much time finding a suitable place to dwell, a place to call our own. We fell in love with this land, and we call it Draenor. Durotan nodded. He had heard the term before. He liked how it sat on his tongue when he spoke it, and the orcs did not have a name for this place other than worlds. In our term, we have not the arrogance to think the orcs would use it as well, but such we have dubbed it. And we love Draenor deeply. It is a beautiful world, and we have seen many. Orgrim gasped. You have seen other worlds? Indeed we have. We have met many people. People like the orcs? Velen smiled gently. There is no one like the orcs, he said. Respect resonated in his voice. You are unique in our travels. Durotan and Orgrim looked at each other and sat up a little straighter in their chairs. But yes, we have been traveling for some time before we found this land. Here we are, and here we will stay. Durotan burned to ask more, to ask how long they had been traveling, what their homeland had been like, why they had left it. But there was something in Velen's timeless face that told him that although he had been invited to inquire, the Draenei would not tell him that particular tale. So instead, he asked about how they tamed the nature of their magic and weapons. Our magic comes from the earth, Durotan said, from the shaman and the ancestors. Our magic comes from a different source, Velen said. I do not think you will understand if I explained it. Orgrim said indignantly, We are not stupid. Forgive me, I do not mean to imply that, Velen said. At once. It was a graceful and sincere apology, and again, Durotan was impressed. Your people are wise, and you two are obviously bright, but I'm not sure I have the words in your language. I have no doubt if I had the time and vocabulary you would understand. Even the explanation he seemed to grope for the words. Durotan thought of the sort of magic that could disguise a city, thought of the soft, uncanny metal somehow melded with gems of the earth and soil and solid stone, and realized that Velen was right. There did not breathe an orc who could have grasped all of this in a single evening. Though he suspected Mother Kreshar would have an intrinsic comprehension, and he again wondered why it was that the two races did not interact more. The conversation turned to more mundane topics. The youth learned that deep in the Trigadar forest was a spot sacred to the Draenei called Arkandun. Here the dead were laid to rest, placed in the ground instead of being burned on pyres. Privately, Durotan thought this odd, but he held his tongue. Telmore was the closest town to the city of the dead, and Velen had come on a sad mission to lay to rest someone who had died fighting the same ogre that almost claimed Orgrim and Durotan earlier that day. Normally, Velen explained, he lived in a beautiful place called the Temple of Karabor, where there were other Draenei towns, but the largest was to the north, a place called Shathra. At last, the meal was over. Velen sighed and his eyes rested upon his empty plate, but Durotan felt certain the prophet did not see it. Will you excuse me? Velen said, rising. It has been a long day, and I must meditate before I sleep. It has been an honor to meet you, Durotan of the Frostworth clan, and Orgrim of the Blackrock clan. I trust you will sleep well, deeply, safe within these walls, where none of your people have been before. Durotan and Orgrim rose with the others and bowed. Velen smiled with Durotan thought, a hint of that strange sorrow he had glimpsed in the Draenei leader earlier. We will meet you again, young ones. Good night. Two orcs left shortly after. They were escorted to their rooms, and indeed slept well, though Durotan had a dream of an old orc sitting quietly beside him, and wondered what that meant. "Bring him," the old orc said to Mother Kesher. Mother Kesher, the eldest shaman of the Frostwood clan, slept deeply. Because of her high position of honor, her tent was second in lavish only that to of Garad, the clan leader. Thick rugs of cleft fur kept her old bones from the cold of the earth, and a loyal and loving granddaughter tended to her needs, cooking and cleaning and keeping the fire stoked on cold days for the clan's mother. Mother Cashier's duty was to listen to the wind and water and fire and grass, and drink the bitter herbal beverage each night that opened her mind to visits from the ancestors. She gathered information for her clan the way the others gathered fruit and firewood, and this gift nourished them as deeply. The old orc was not present, and yet she knew he was real. He was in her dream, and that was enough. For her, in this dream state, she was young and vibrant. She could see her ruddy skin glowing with health, knew from her form to be sleek and knotted with muscle. The old orc was the age at which he had died, the age at which his wisdom had been at its highest. His name had been Talcra in life, but now, although he was many generations distant from her, she called him only grandfather. "You received the message," grandfather told the young, vibrant, dreaming cashier. She nodded, her dark hair flowing with the movements. He and the Blackrock boy are with the Draenei," she said. "They will be safe. I can feel it." Grandfather Talcra nodded, his thick jaws shaking with the movement. His tusks were yellowed with the age, and one had been broken off in a battle long since forgotten. "Yes, safe they are. Bring him." It was the second time he said this, and Kesher was not certain as to what he meant. "He will come to the mountains in a few months, when the trees shed their leaves to sleep," she said. "So yes, I will bring him." Telrock shook his head fiercely, his brown eyes narrowing in annoyance. Kesher smothered a smile. Of all the spirits that honored her with their presence, Grandfather Telcra was one of the least pleasant. "No, no!" Telcra growled. "Bring him to us. Bring him to the caverns of Oshigan. I will look upon him there." Kashra inhaled softly. You wish me to take him to meet the ancestors?" "Is that not what I just said? Foolish girl! What has happened to the shaman these days?" It was a rant he went on frequently, and it troubled Kesher not in the slightest. She was too stunned by the import of what he had just said. Sometimes the ancestors wanted to see a child before. It was infrequent, but it had occurred. Usually it meant that the child in question was destined for the shamanic path. She had not thought Durotan's feet would walk that road. It was rare that a shaman led a clan. There would be too much pulling him in each direction for him to be an effective leader. To both listen to and honor the spirits and guide one's peoples well were more than most orcs could manage. One who could do both would be a remarkable orc indeed. When Keshar did not reply, Grandfather growled and slammed his staff on the ground. Keshar jumped slightly. "I will bring him on his initiation day," Keshar assured his ancestor. "At least you understand," Talcra said, shaking his staff at her. "And if you fail me, I will take my staff to your head instead of the innocent earth." could not completely hide a smile as he said it, and Kesha smiled back as her dream self closed her eyes. For all his blustering and short-tempered, Talcraw was wise and kind and loved her deeply. She wished she had known him when he was alive, but when he died almost 100 years ago, Kesha's eyelids fluttered open, and she sighed as her spirit returned to her current real body, as old as Talcraw had been when he had died. Hands and feet curled up with joint pain, body weak, hair stark white. She knew in her heart that the time would come soon when she would be able to leave this body, this shell, for the final time and be with the ancestors in the sacred mountain. Drekthar, her apprentice, would then be the advisor to Garad and the rest of the Frostwolf clan. She had every confidence in him, and actually looked forward to the day when she would be pure spiritual energy. Although she mused as the sunlight trickled in and the birdsong caressed her ears, she would miss the things that being alive granted her. The simple things like bird songs, hot food, the loving touch of her granddaughter. "Bring him," grandfather had said. And so she would.